Hey, everybody. Good morning. It is Resistance Live for the 3rd of September, 2019, and we're here. I trust everybody's been watching what's been happening with Hurricane Dorian. Just want to do a quick shout out to Jose Andres, the chef who lived through Dorian in the Bahamas and is currently doing food supply for people who are victims of the hurricane. So lots going on there at the moment. And obviously, anything that you want to do from a donation standpoint makes sense. I just saw right before I went live that the storm has been downgraded to a Category 2. So I have plenty of friends who have moved out of Florida. That doesn't mean it's not going to be really awful and bad. So we should kind of keep an eye on that and obviously support in whatever way that we can. Okay. We had a few questions today about the declining mental state of the president. So I'm just going to start there and say a couple of things at the moment about what is happening right now with regard to the president, his mental state, and where we find ourselves. So from the standpoint of the 25th Amendment, as you all know, it's never been invoked before in the United States, save for one instance where there was a president who had to have surgery and it was implemented for a very short window of time, just a couple of hours. It has never been invoked to remove a president from office. And from the standpoint of where we all find ourselves now with regard to this president, his declining mental state, as we talked about last week, there are some very grave concerns right now about whether or not the 25th Amendment could even be invoked because there are so many acting cabinet secretaries. So reminder here, the way that this ordinarily would work, we think, because it's never been invoked before, is that the vice president, combined with some majority number of the executive branch, which is presumed to be the cabinet, would have to present evidence to Congress that the president was unfit to serve. There's then a process by which the president is allowed to submit evidence that he is fit to serve, and depending on how the vote goes down, he either stays in office or he doesn't. From the standpoint of how this looks from the standpoint of Pence, that in and of itself is a very serious unlikelihood. I have not thought forever, basically, that Pence would be in a position where he would want to invoke the 25th Amendment. It's not out of the question, because this is one of the questions you all asked this morning. It is not out of the question that in the event that the president really goes off and does something completely insane. I'm not trying to minimize what he does every day, but let's just say hypothetically that he tries to start a nuclear war. Presumably he would be removed. But at this stage of the game, for the kind of diarrhea of the mouth, the congratulations to Poland on the anniversary of the Nazi invasion, which he did this morning, or rather over the weekend, that sort of thing, that he would likely be removed for that is profoundly slim. So we have issues of Pence being willing to do it. We have issues that are actually potentially constitutional issues about whether or not acting cabinet secretaries could vote as that percentage of the executive branch that is needed to remove the president. And then you add to it the fact that it's really unclear, because it's never been invoked, what the formal procedure for submitting evidence would look like. I mean, there's just layers of the 25th Amendment that make all of this very difficult. And, the fact that it has never been invoked before also makes the process very unpredictable. Now, there are a couple of questions that were asked, though, about this that I want to make really clear. And we haven't talked about this in a very long time. I mean, I think we're going back to the earliest days of Resistance Live. We're coming up now on 3 years ago, which is crazy. 3 years ago, when we talked about the issue of criminal insanity. So let me just explain this all to you, okay? There's multiple layers of criminal insanity. There's the capacity to participate in your trial, right? So if you are so incapacitated that you can't participate in your own defense, then usually the way that this works, if a court rules that way, because reminder, if there is a defense made or a claim made by a defendant that they are so mentally incapacitated that they can't participate in their own trial, there is a hearing about that at the criminal trial to determine whether or not the person is sane enough to stand trial. If they are not, they don't go free. They don't go walking around on the streets randomly. Instead, they're housed in a criminally in a facility designed for the criminally insane. So, that's the first thing, is that it's not like the president, if he was removed under the 25th Amendment, could randomly plead insanity and get off the hook. It doesn't work like that. But the second thing to remember here is that insanity is only a defense to certain kinds of crimes, okay? So, like, the president can't plead insanity in a defense to bribery, for instance. The likelihood in any event, granted, he might hire a lawyer that tries it, but the likelihood that he would avoid criminal liability in this instance on the basis of a claim of insanity, in light of all the potential criminal allegations that are here, is like nil. Okay. And I want to make that clear from the standpoint of New York State as well. You don't get to plead insanity to money laundering. You can try to plead insanity to say that you can't participate in your own trial and therefore you should be housed in a criminally, some facility in a prison that's designed for people who are insane. He's not going to get off the hook, is my point. You can plead insanity to murder, but he's not going to plead insanity to money laundering or for that matter, financial crimes. Okay. So there isn't a basis. In other words, the way that this circles back around based on your questions this morning, there isn't a basis to avoid the 25th Amendment on the grounds that it might allow the president to then escape criminal liability. Okay. Because the standard for, at least as far as we can tell, the standard for removal under the 25th Amendment is a different standard from what would be applied in the instant that the president said he was so mentally incapacitated that he couldn't participate in his own defense, or for that matter, if he tried to plead insanity as a defense. Those standards are very different. So you could feasibly remove a president under the 25th Amendment as incapacitated and then still prosecute him thereafter for various crimes. And I will remind you all that the other thing to keep in mind here is that, we're not just talking about the criminality of the president himself. This is the other thing to keep in mind. For instance, the investigations that Tish James has underway in New York State are against the Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, against potentially the kids. So, he doesn't gain anything, in other words, by being removed under the 25th Amendment. I guess that's the most important key to the questions that were coming around this morning. He will not be able to evade criminal liability if he is removed under the 25th Amendment. I think the reason why we haven't seen the 25th Amendment invoked has more to do with the fact that nobody really knows how it applies, and the fact that we can't get Pence lined up to do it, let alone potentially the majority of the cabinet that would be necessary here. I'll just add, one of you asked a question here. Is this why Pelosi is avoiding invoking the 25th Amendment or seeking to have the 25th Amendment invoked? No. Reminder, Pelosi doesn't have anything to do with the 25th Amendment. She can't have the president removed under the 25th Amendment as Speaker of the House. Again, there's a lot of moving pieces in play here about the ways in which the president could be removed. I just want to say that I think the 25th Amendment is probably the least likely methodology, and this is the reason why we've all been leaning so hard into impeachment. So on that note, Nancy Pelosi gave a speech over the weekend saying that she doesn't think the general public is in favor of impeachment. I will remind you all that impeachment proceedings are underway. It's very important that we don't forget that we've actually had the House Judiciary Committee state that in pleadings, right? That, some of the documents and materials and testimony that they are seeking for purposes of the ongoing impeachment proceedings. So please don't forget that we're already kind of like well on the way there when it comes to this kind of thing, okay? The other thing that I just wanted to mention here in this regard, though, is that, I am assuming, and, this is a little bit of an assumption, I will freely admit this, but I am assuming that if Nadler successfully gets the documents and the testimony that he wants, it's not going to matter what Nancy Pelosi thinks. Fundamentally, I honestly feel like it's getting to that point because the process at this moment in time, while she is overseeing, obviously, the legislative agenda of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, the push here is significant. And, we already know that there's been conflict between Nadler and Pelosi in the past over the issue of impeachment. We don't have any reason to think that that's been resolved, frankly. The other thing I will just add here is that, as I said on Twitter over the weekend, the idea that the public isn't in favor of impeachment, what I said was, I don't know who she's been talking to, but it's not the public. Because obviously, as we now know, more than 50% of the Democrats in the House support impeachment. We have indications in some polling that the number of Americans that support impeachment has been up to 60%. So it's a little crazy that she would say such a thing, right? And it does obviously raise questions as to why. So there's things to think about there. But, the long and the short of it, to answer your questions about this morning, is I do not think the 25th Amendment is not being invoked for some reason having to do with holding the president criminally liable when he's out of office. It doesn't. The two things are completely separate from a legal standpoint. And I don't think that there's any reason why, Pence would be avoiding impeachment. Avoiding the 25th Amendment, for instance, in that regard. So that's that. Okay. We did have a question about how does the Mueller report get used in the event that the president is not impeached. So reminder, impeachment hearings are already underway. Again, I feel like I have to keep repeating that. The Mueller report is getting used for that purpose, right? We've seen Mueller testify about the contents of the Mueller report. The underlying evidence of the Mueller report is part of what is being sought in court. So it's not like the Mueller report was a waste of time, and it's not like it's going to be a waste of time. Quite the contrary. It's actually serving as the foundational evidence for a lot of what's happening right now in the House. The key here, though, with regard to the Mueller report, and again, it's really hard in this news cycle, I freely admit it, to keep the focus where it needs to be, is that it enlightens the public about the ongoing, potentially ongoing criminal activity of the president with regard to Volume 1. And that includes, by the way, all these insane statements about Russia, and also with regard to obstruction of justice. So it's an educational tool, but I don't want anybody to have the impression, because this is certainly not what's happening in the House, that the Mueller report and all of the effort that went into it and the 2 years of investigations and everything else, all those hundreds of subpoenas, thousands of subpoenas, were meaningless. They're not. I think the issue actually at the moment is that a lot of people don't realize the foundational aspect it's playing in the impeachment proceedings that are underway in the House. And it's one of the reasons why there's just an ongoing battle about all of this in the courts, by the way, because that underlying evidence is damning. If Mueller can't indict the president because of the policy of the DOJ, but nonetheless can issue a 2-volume report indicating that the president may have obstructed justice as many as 10 times, that underlying evidence, including the grand jury testimony, is very significant. So let's just not forget that, notwithstanding the fact that the Mueller report is not dominating the news cycle right now, it is absolutely and was absolutely not a fruitless endeavor. And there's far more to be said about this, frankly, that we may hear about when that evidence becomes public. So let's just keep a clear path to kind of what's exactly going on here in the House, particularly at the return from the recess. We had indications and reports this morning, by the way, that I should just mention, that in October, the House is going to hold hearings on the payments that were made to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal by the president or his people during the 2016 campaign. Lots of people, by the way, are talking about that as a cover-up investigation and not just an investigation into campaign finance fraud. Now, again, I am not pleased with the speed of all of this. I will just say that out and out. I feel like this is taking way too long. It should not be taking this long. These hearings should have already taken place. The court apparatus that has been invoked now took forever to invoke by the House Dems. I'm not happy about that. This is one of the reasons why the 2020 election continues to dominate in the organizing efforts that I'm working on right now and the ways in which people are trying to move things forward. So, just keep in mind that just because we're not hearing about it doesn't mean it's not relevant, meaning the Mueller report. Doesn't mean it's not serving as a foundational basis. Does it mean that impeachment is proceeding in the way that we had all hoped? Maybe that most of the best legal minds in this country thought it would? No, it doesn't mean that. And that's unfortunate. So that's that. All right. We have very big developments across the pond today. So something very strange happened this morning, which is that Boris Johnson, who, as you all know, is the new Prime Minister of England, the UK, was in the Houses of Parliament making a speech this morning when there was a defection from the Conservative Party. Literally, a Conservative MP got up and walked to the other side of the House and joined the Liberal Democrats. So what this means is that the Conservative Party has lost its majority. They had a majority of 1. And, Boris Johnson, by the way, signaled over the weekend that he was going to hold a new election in the UK rather than avoiding a no-deal Brexit. So, he is determined to charge toward a no-deal Brexit. Damn the torpedoes, right? Like, who cares what it's going to do to the world economy? Who cares what it's going to do to Europe and the UK? Who cares what it's going to mean from the standpoint of trade? And it's disturbing. Now, some of you have asked, does this mean he's no longer the prime minister? Well, he is the prime minister right now. He doesn't have a majority. And so one of the things that means, by the way, is that there was a vote that was supposed to come up this week. And it doesn't impact the vote very much from what I have researched, okay? So what it means is there was a vote that was supposed to come up this week with regard to Brexit. A number of Conservative Party members had already said they were going to vote against the deal and defy the prime minister. Now he doesn't have the majority even in the numbers to get the votes that he needs on anything, let alone on Brexit. So it raises the UK is in chaos this morning. I don't want to minimize it at all. It's nuts. And you can actually go look at the video where the Conservative MP crosses the Houses of Parliament. And at that moment, Boris Johnson kind of goes a little crazy. I did not watch the totality of his speech, but I've been following the reporting, and apparently he went completely off the rails in the additional statements that he made thereafter. And it means very significant things fundamentally for what's happening inside the UK. So what is this? How is this all relevant to us? Well, it's relevant from a global economy standpoint. But the one point I want to make about this is that, Putin's efforts to sow discord and destroy Western democracies at this moment in time are looking pretty damn successful. And that is profoundly unfortunate. Again, I think we all have to pay attention to what's happening internationally right now on a number of fronts. By the way, I will just mention again, Kashmir, right? There's things going on right now in India with India's far-right nationalist, anti-Muslim prime minister, where they've shut down all communications out of Kashmir, and there's reports of anti-Muslim violence everywhere, right? We have to look at what's happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro, also ultra-right-wing. The burning of the Amazon rainforest is going to have profound impact on the global economy. Immigration, by the way, global warming, right? All of these things are related. And so I don't want to put anybody in the position this morning of feeling like all of this is hopeless. But I do think we all have to be mindful and aware of the way in which we're all connected, right? And one of the things that means is that when we're fighting for our democracy, we're not just fighting for our democracy, we're fighting for democracy, period. So it is, it's critical at this point that kind of we continue our efforts. And I will just add, there's a lot of reporting going on right now about the efforts that are being made to undermine activist movements, including issues of infiltration of activist movements by government officials or government agents with an aim to destroy those movements and their synchronicity and their cohesion. Again, the thing I just want to say here is that, these are the times that call upon all of us to do things that we didn't think we were capable of before, that we didn't know how to do. And that's going to be the case going forward. Some of you said to me, there were some comments on Friday about you're tired of hearing about 2020. Well, let me just say this. If he's not impeached and he's not removed by the 25th Amendment, 2020 is all we've got. So, again, it's going to be a mantra of mine going forward that we need to organize in every way that we can. And I will just mention that there have been some really creative efforts to get people registered to vote recently that we can all apply. You can register people to vote when they're in line for a Popeye's chicken sandwich, right? You can register people to vote when they're in line at the DMV, there's all sorts of ways to get, and that's if you don't have a motor voter bill. There are all sorts of ways to get involved and get people propelling forward. And it's more important than ever before that we do that. So that's the broadcast for today. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for your comments and your support and everything else. And just please rest assured that as we move toward the end of the year, we here are thinking about all sorts of creative ways to help you all activate and get organized and do all the things that we know we need to do right now, and to move forward in all the right directions, because it's a scary time. and we're all going to have to do more than we've done before. So that's that for today. Happy day after Labor Day. Welcome back. And I will look forward to talking to all of you tomorrow. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.